Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. We are beginning our work this morning with S310, taking more testimony on several sections of that rather large bill. I know that Mr. Baker is on a timeline and is on it up in Senate Natural, so having him go first. So Charlie, welcome back to GovOps and tell us what you know about S310.
Thank you very much. For the record, Charlie Baker. I am the Executive Director of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Committee in the day. Also chair our Government Relations Committee for our state association of RPCs called the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies. And I will provide you written testimony digitally afterwards. Apologies, we were doing some group editing amongst the RPC directors. So this testimony this morning is actually on behalf of all the RPCs. And I'll just start off with, in general, we do support the bill, and we have some specific suggestions and recommendations that I'll go through now. In section 1, we support this new grant program. Our one suggestion on this is to recommend a report back to the legislature every year or two so that you can review the grants that have been made relative to the statutory priorities, and you can consider any changes in priorities that might be needed over time. Second comment is in section 7, which is the local and regional organization for emergency management. We support the expansion of the Regional Emergency Management Committee membership as described on page 15. And the RPC staff those committees in each region. Third comment on in section 10, which is a state emergency management plan. There's language in there that asks the state to provide templates and guidance for local emergency management plans. We like parallel language for that the plan should include templates and guidance for regional emergency management plans as well. Which is something that is required also in statute. In the fourth comment, and this is just a kind of an editorial note, it's section 13. Just notice that on page 24 and on page 38 and 39, there's some exact same language. So just kind of pointing that out. I don't know if it's intentional that it's in two places. It's in 3619 about sewer and plumbing, where the board may require owners of property abutting a street to have all sewers connected, is in 3619. That same language is part of section 3603 on page 24. So just that's just maybe a cleanup.
This was a combination. There were 3 chapters with stormwater utility, and they combined it into 2 as my understanding. We're going to take some more testimony on this over the next couple of days, but it could be that they were duplicated. So we'll take a look at trying to make sure we.
I think that
I'm seeing legislative counsel nod that he caught that. So thanks.
Yeah. Thanks. And onto a bigger issue, and I'm not sure that this bill is the vehicle to really address this, but in section 13 on page 39, section 3620, in the titles of the section's meetings, semicolon vote. And I'm not an expert in this section of statute, but would like to draw your attention to an issue that recently played out in Westford, where we're trying to encourage our villages to get wastewater. And I could name probably another dozen towns around the state where a similar thing is kind of played out. And the town brought the proposal for village wastewater to the residents for a vote. It failed by a vote of 488 to 532 were against it. And the issue that, and again, I don't know if it's in this bill or some other bill in the future, but is to consider whether all the residents of a town should be voting on these very localized wastewater systems, or if it should just be the property owners or residents within the sewers service area that is proposed, who are really on the financial obligation of the debt for the utility. And I think there's just kind of creating a conflict that we're seeing play out. And obviously it's hard for town residents that are a little further out from the village to really have too much of an interest. And so I think we're seeing a lot of these votes kind of play out this way. And maybe there just should be an option where the town can either have just the voters within the sewer service area vote on the financing for it versus town-wide vote. And again, I'm not sure this is the right thing or right statute to make this change in, but if we are going to accomplish our, and you can name a whole list of goals, our climate change goals, our water quality goals, drinking water goals, smart growth goals, housing goals. We do need to have a better system. And frankly, I'm concerned within DEC, there's been a lot of money that has gone to water wastewater systems in DEC. And I know they I think they have an idea of where that's going to go across the state. But I'm concerned that we have set up a system where we're going to continue to run into these issues locally. And this doesn't feel like we have alignment of those who benefit and those who are also taking on obligations in the right voting mechanism. Sorry, that was kind of a big issue I just threw at you. It's not directly addressed in here.
So Representative Hango had a question.
Thank you. One clarification. I think we have a slightly different version of the bill because I think that's on page 40 of our bill. Where section 3620 meetings vote. And my question is, if the change you'd like to see is necessary, is it only the people in that sewer district who are paying the rates for that service, not the whole town, as you're suggesting now? This seems to ask the whole town to vote. So is that what the issue?
Yeah, that's the issue I'm trying to get at. Is like, are these self-sufficient utilities? And I'm hoping they are, right? Like, I'm hoping the sewer ratepayers are paying for not just the annual operations, but also the long-term maintenance. So I think it just feels like there's kind of a disconnect in governance decision-making there.
So Charlie, what that brings up for me, I think this is a bigger thing that we're going to be able to resolve in S310. I just want to say that as the chair, that's my opinion here. If the committee wants to argue with me, but I think this is a really important topic. The thing I'm concerned about is that without establishing an actual district, without establishing a municipality to, be a separate set of voters that are voting on that, like we have a mechanism for that. So if a town like Westford, for instance, wanted to come to us and say, we want to establish a water district in this area with these voters, it would be a separate sub-municipality. And that's the way we have in our construct in order to have a separate set of voters. So we have that path. Maybe we need to make it clearer or put that path into the planning process around these water projects. But I would be really concerned about establishing in a bill or in law a way for a town to take on debt for a water project, even if all of the cost of that was, in the setup of the water district being paid for by fees from the users. I would be worried about having the rest of the people in the greater municipality left out of the decision making unless we actually form a sub municipality. So there is a path for that, and I think that's the path we should use, and we should talk.
Yeah, and maybe the critical
about getting some draft legislation if we do need to do something to make it easier or more clear for towns that are considering, having a new water wastewater system to establish a municipality for that purpose.
Yeah, and I think I'm really suggesting maybe an option, and I think you're right that it is, and maybe it's just a sequencing thing that local utility municipality isn't set up yet. And so we're kind of having a cart before the horse issue going on. But so anyway, that's and I'm citing Westford, but it's a concern amongst the RPC directors in general. So thank you for the flag on that to be addressed later.
No, I think it's something we should definitely look at. This bill is already feeling like it's tearing under its weight.
I'm going beyond the purpose of this, which is more about disaster response, et cetera.
I just had one quick question on that. I hope I'm not opening up something that.
We're there, man. Go for it.
Okay. So with what you're talking about here with isolating the boat, those who would be hooked up to the utilities, are they also isolated to the expense? Okay, cool.
Yeah, the idea.
The water.
Yeah, no, I got you. I just wanted to like ask the question to make
Yeah.
sure I wasn't just
No,
assuming.
that's a good thing though.
Yeah.
Yeah, comment number 6, sorry, and I am looking, thank you, Representative Hango, at the version passed by the Senate, so it may be a different version than what we're looking at. But section 32, which in my version is on pages 55 to 56, this is a State Emergency Response Commission, and the creation. And the appointment of the members of the CERC are proposed to be changed from 9 gubernatorial appointments to 10 appointed in a split method, 3 by the speaker, 3 by the president pro tem, and 4 by the governor. Given that the previous paragraph requires 1 representative from the 10 categories, we want to recommend that maybe the 10 categories need to be split out amongst the speaker, pro tem, and governor, so that it's clear which of them is appointing which of those 10 categories.
This is, I just want to make sure this is the Emergency Response Commission section.
Yes.
Yeah, we definitely are on different.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
on draft
Section
1
32, you
point,
said again, Charlie?
Yes, section 32.
we're on draft 1.6, just.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry. I tried to pull off the most recent one and I failed.
We just this morning, so if everybody would, so the Senate ASPAC is on. So some of our witnesses are going to be working from the Senate ASPAC. The strike law is for us to look at today. It is 98% the same language. So we probably will find everything that Charlie's talking about. If you'll give us the statutory reference or the section number instead of the page number, then
We did do that,
We
32.
said 30.
Section 32 and it's
That's page
30.
bottom of 58 for us.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Section 30 of this proposed statute.
we'll get to that strike law amendment committee once we get through our testimony this morning.
And what I'm referencing is in paragraph A in section 30 of the proposed statutory language where it talks about 10 public members. And then there's a listing of all of those, or types of organizations that are supposed to be represented. Just that those should probably be assigned to the appointing person. Just to prevent any overlaps or confusion. And then the final thing I'm just going to mention to you is just that the regional planning commissions do get some funding through Vermont Emergency Management through an annual emergency management planning grant program. And we try to play as supportive and critical role as we can in supporting the state's emergency planning, hazard mitigation, disaster recovery and preparedness as we can. And this has been level funded for at least the last 6 or 7 fiscal years. So just a little ask if there's ever an occasion to be able to nudge BEM or the state somehow to increase our funding for emergency management work, that would be great.
So one of the things that I'm interested in looking at that I don't think we've talked through as a committee or ledge council yet that is worth thinking about here is we're setting up the community disaster. I can never remember the name. It's too long. Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Grant Program. And one of the requests that we got from Vermont Emergency Management when Stephanie was here a couple of days ago was to allow them to make grants additionally to regional planning and conservation districts. And I'm wondering if your association would support us basically saying municipalities get the priority, but that these grants can also be funded for these purposes to RPCs and conservation districts.
It's news to me that the conservation districts have any role here, but yeah, I think we would definitely like to be included in that list. I mean, almost all the time we're doing it for a municipality. So that would be fine.
The conservation district piece is about like upstream flood prevention.
Yeah, okay, flood mitigation, natural resource work, great. That makes sense, as mitigation. That's all I have, sir.
Okay, any questions for Charlie? That was some rapid fire. I know you're wanted down the hall. Okay, we've got notes and you're going to send us written testimonies.
I'm going to send this
after
to
that.
you shortly.
Okay. Thank you, sir. We'll let you go down the hall.
All right, thanks much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, our next witness is Siegel. Ms. Siegel, are you online?
Yes, I am. I am here.
Welcome to House Gov Ops. Could you please introduce yourself for the record and give us your testimony on S310?
No problem. My name is Laura Siegel. I'm the director for Deaf, Hard of Hearing, Deaf-Blind Services under the Department of Disability, Aging, and Independent Living, also known as DALE.
Thank you for being
Members,
here.
what was that? I'm sorry, this is the
I
interpreter.
just
What
said
did you
thank you
say?
for being here.
No problem. It's my pleasure to be here today. So I'll be reading my testimony. Members of the House, Government, and Military Affairs. What folks have brought to my attention is that during the governor's press conferences, the remote ASL interpreter and captioning are not always appearing on the broadcasts, thus leaving the deaf, deaf-blind, and hard of hearing community without the information they need in a timely manner. The American Community Survey, ACS, indicates that approximately 70,000 individuals in Vermont experience hearing loss. However, when we delve deeper, we find an estimated 400 to 500 individuals who identify as culturally deaf and up to 40 individuals who identify as deaf-blind. It's important to note that deaf-blind is a broad term, and not everyone may identify with this label. Some individuals might prefer to describe themselves as hard of hearing, with low vision, or as deaf with complete blindness, among other possibilities. I wish to ask for you to ensure two simple solutions, the implementation of which will provide accessibility during the governor's press conferences and any future announcements regarding natural disasters. One is picture-in-picture PIP. PIP functionality allows for simultaneous display of an interpreter in American Sign Language, ASL, alongside the main video feed. By enabling PIP, viewers who require ASL interpretation will be able to watch the press conferences while following the interpreter signing. The biggest hurdles are that each TV station operates independently. It would help streamline the level of accessibility. Second would be visible captioning. This allows individuals to read the spoken content in real time, ensuring they receive accurate and timely information. Visible captions should be clear, properly synchronized with the audio, and easily readable for optimal accessibility regarding whichever platform is being used, i.e. Facebook or YouTube. The Accessibility Subcommittee under DHHDB, Deaf, Hard of Hearing, Deaf-Blind Advisory Council, explained in great depth, along with recommendations and visual aids, for you to understand what needs to happen in our state. We see it already being practiced in others, and we should follow their examples. I hope that you can enable these fixes to better serve all Vermonters. Vermonters should not have to go on a scavenger hunt to locate that one channel that has all the accessibility features. Oftentimes, they aren't always available until much later. For instance, I wasn't able to create a video in ASL sharing useful resources until midway through the flooding recovery period. FEMA assisted with certain context that needed to be shared. That should be happening within a matter of days, not weeks. Every individual has a different checklist in their mindset when it comes to equal accessibility. Thank you.
All right, committee, any questions for Ms. Siegel?
That's some of the stuff we heard before, which is good. It's a repeat, yeah.
I think that your testimony largely reflects the testimony that we heard from the Office of Racial Equity earlier. And I was wondering if you have any recommendations for us on additional language, or if you're supportive of the Senate language around access.
I guess I don't really understand the question.
Yeah, so we have language in our bill that tries to direct speedier services for both PIP and the captioning during the next event. And then there's the working group that is supposed to dive into the details. Those are, I think they start in section 21 of our bill.
I would have to look at the bill specifically, but honestly, I would recommend setting up a protocol that's more universal and that they can follow. They can follow that if indeed an event occurs. Having the interpreting, the captioning company, making sure that someone is ready to go. So if that natural disaster does happen, and it make it more streamlined and become a priority. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think our bill, as it came to us from the Senate, we're doing the second pass here in the House, says that the Vermont Emergency Management needs to collaborate with stakeholders, including your advisory council, on developing some of that policy in a working group. So that's the planning piece. And then there's also language that says, as soon as practicable, they must provide language assistance services. And then it sort of is more forward-looking about developing those protocols with a working group around picture-in-picture and captioning. And I just wanted to check in with you that we're heading in the right direction.
I believe so. I believe so. You know, what's important, from my own experience is that I'm noticing I try to approach, Vermont Emergency Management, what they expect me to develop, like a content, but they're not letting me know, well, what exactly do you want me to share with people? My department is not directly involved, so hopefully counselors and the department that I work under can hopefully inform what we need and figure out what we exactly need to do. And so there's equal access.
I think that we share the goals, and it'll take some more collaboration to get the policy right. So we're pointing in a direction with our bill, and I'm hopeful that by the next time we have a big event like the floods last year, we'll have policy that communicates better to all communities in the format that they need.
Definitely. And I'm available if anyone would like to reach out to me for more elaboration on what might be included. Please let me know if you need my assistance in any way.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. We have a question from the audience.
Dale, and I just want to say that Laura and I will get together and we'll get back to you in any language.
Great. Thank you.
This is for the interpreter. Could you repeat that? I could not hear it very clearly.
That was Rebecca Silvernagel, and she said from Dale. And she said that she would collaborate with you on looking at the language.
Rebecca, that would be a great team approach. I love that. Thank you so much for the support.
Any other questions on this from the committee? I think we'll invite you to stick around because I think we're going to continue talking about issues around access with our next couple of witnesses. So if you'd like to stay in the Zoom room, please do.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Our next witness is Ray Coffey.
How's it going? Thanks for having me. I'm Ray Coffey, the Community Services Director with the City of Winooski and also an active member of the Vermont Language Justice Project since its kind of earliest days during the COVID pandemic. So here largely to express support for sections 21 and 23 in this bill. I think seeing language access at the forefront of the thinking around emergency response is really important. Want to speak briefly to our kind of experience in Winooski and then have a couple specific recommendations or I guess more questions within the language of the bill. You know, I think in terms of our Winooski obviously is a very diverse community. It's the most diverse in the state, upwards of 20 different native languages spoken there, the only majority minority school district in the state, and a poverty level that's about twice the state average. So we have a lot of challenges around communication with not only language, but access to technology and just the ways that people are accessing information. So we're constantly having to be creative about how we do outreach. I think having some guidance and some consistent approaches at the state level around emergency response in particular would be really valuable. It feels like each community is sort of discreetly developing plans and policies. And I think that while that's great, and communities like ours have really committed to that, I think as the state gets more diverse, as we see language variety spreading broadly across the state, it's really important that there's a consistent approach there, especially as we look at regional and statewide emergencies in particular. The COVID pandemic, I think for us was a really great example of the power of this approach. We had a few burgeoning outbreaks within our multilingual community within Winooski. Based on surveillance data from the state, we're able to really quickly identify those, and using some of the techniques that we kind of developed on the fly, videos in multiple languages, use of trusted community partners and leaders, and making sure that we were taking at times a very complicated English language, boiling that down into simpler English language, and then translating it. As a result of those approaches, we were able to pretty quickly get our arms around those outbreaks and prevent potential spread in some of these communities. So I think we saw real success there. Again, candidly, we were building that as we were going because of the lack of existence of these resources at the state level. So I think it'd be interesting to continue to push on that through this bill and the subsequent work. I think specific recommendations, just language-wise, and again, I'll reference sections in case I'm not looking at the right version, but section 18, public notification policy during emergency, just noted there's not specific language around multilingual resources, and wondering if within that section it's worth calling that out as a goal. I think it's, again, sort of feels reflective of the later sections. And then, let's see. Within section 21, section A, but within here, there's a reference to multilingual options. And I think just looking maybe for a more explicit definition there of what that might mean. Again, I think there's a lot of ways to provide that type of service, and I think being a little bit more prescribed might be valuable. And then at a kind of high level, this is not specific to any one section, but just I think a broad question, and maybe you all having a better sense of the broad bill would know where this would land. But I'm curious, within the guidance from the state for municipalities as they develop local emergency management plans, if there's any specific prompts or guidance around the provision of multilingual resources. I just think we just went through the re-up of that process, and obviously in Winooski we're thinking about that, including that. But as I recall, there's not specific sections or asks or prompts within that we're being asked to respond to. So I think it might be worth encouraging that thinking at the state level. Because again, I think some communities that aren't as diverse as ours aren't thinking about this until it's a problem, and not because they're being negligent. It's just it's not something they're used to operating within. And I think, again, as we see our diversity spreading more broad across the state, I think it's something proactively that would be really good to get people thinking about.
Wait, are you specifically talking about making sure that we have translation of information during an all hazards emergency event in multiple languages? Or are you thinking about the language services more broadly?
I think yes.
Okay.
To answer your question, I mean, I think obviously the emergent issues is the priority, right? I think that's a really important piece to be focused on as a starting point. And I think again, referencing back to COVID, I think we're able to start to work with the state through the Department of Health to take information from press conferences quickly, but boil that down to translatable English language and get that turned back out in multiple languages through the work of Allison and Vermont Language Justice Project. But that was all happening kind of on the fly with no budget, just through the work of a kind of informal collaborative. There was no state mandate. There was no kind of requirement at the state level that be happening. That was just us doing that to respond to the needs of our local communities and largely Burlington and Winooski. So I think having some guidance at the state level that says this is how we do business would be really valuable to help shape that approach in the future. I don't know if that specifically gets to your question. And then, I mean, I think one of the really great things we've seen with the Language Justice Project is it started in response to an emergency, right, with COVID. But we've now seen the value of that infrastructure and that system over time as we start to respond to less emergent things. So I think it's a really good starting point, an important starting point, but potentially a place where we can look at system development for creating equitable access for information more broadly in the future.
We've been working with the Office of Racial Equity, looking at their language access report. We had put in pretty significant money, but not fully funding the multi-year program that they're rolling out and working on. And I'm wondering if, local agencies like yours are sort of seeing some of the fruits of that investment in terms of the translation of state documents, broadly, state websites. I know that it's a work in progress and they have a multi-year plan on that.
So I will say, first off, I think that's great. I think making those written documents accessible is valuable. I will also say, in our experience in Winooski, a lot of our non-English speaking community are often not literate in their native language. And so we are finding that using in-person or audio and video translation is actually often a more effective tool for getting information out. So again, I think you'll hear a little bit more from Allison about that from Vermont Language Justice perspective. But again, I want to say it's great that we're doing the written translation. I think that's important. We're finding, at least in Winooski, that's not always the best bang for our buck when it comes to getting information to community members, especially in emergent situations. So I don't necessarily have a great recommendation as a pivot point, but I think that it's something to think about as we think about investments in the future. Are there other kind of systems or infrastructure we could be developing?
Chase, go ahead.
Within Winooski, what's the threshold that you set for city communications to communities that speak other than English?
Yeah.
How many people speak the language before you translate?
Yeah, so what I will say is that we are currently working on developing a formal language access plan. So we do not have a official policy within Winooski at this point. We typically have 3 to 4 languages, depending on the year, that we prioritize based on populations. And most of that is set through the school district. So they have really explicit data about which students speak which languages, and we kind of use those percentages as a proxy for the broader community in the absence of a better way to say, in the general population, X% speak Nepali, X% percent speak Arabic. So we're often using the school data as our kind of proxy. But typically for us right now, Nepali, Somali, Arabic, and when we are able, Burmese are those sort of 4 main languages. And we're reviewing every year, at least annually with the school district, what their census looks like for languages, and then using that information to kind of adjust. So that's,
What services do you offer for people who speak other languages? I think I heard you say there were 20 different languages.
yeah, upwards of 20, depending, again,
So what
depending
about
on
the other 16?
So we work a lot with the multilingual liaisons at our school district. We have a relationship that's pretty strong between the city and the school. And all of the languages at the school district that are spoken have some variety of language support embedded within the staff at the school. So we're often, if there's important information going out, using those trusted partners, those interpreters, to share information through the school district channels. That's the primary vehicle at this point that we're using.
And for residents that don't have children in the school system?
So you have, I mentioned in my written testimony, really strong partnerships with Association of Africans Living in Vermont, which is a bit of a misnomer in that they serve the full New American population, not just African folks, and USCRI, and then also Allison at Vermont Language Justice. So we have partnerships with other agencies that are working in the more general population beyond just the school, and are kind of leveraging those partners and contacts as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And within our, I should say, within our communications policy, there's a list prescribed of when we're sending information out. These are the agencies that we are sending that to kind of make sure that that's happening consistently.
Actually, one more. Are you relying on those agencies to inform you what languages are being requested, or do you have any sort of outreach to kind of figure out on a year-by-year basis what the requests and demands are?
Yeah. So again, we're really reliant on that school data and that annual check-in. Certainly if, AALV is seeing a population come in with a particular dialect or a certain language need, we have an open dialogue with them and they would let us know that. But generally the school population has been really reflective of what the broader community need is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Questions for Renee? Thank you very much for sharing this morning. And Allison, you got a lot of calls out and a great testimony, so we're happy to have you next. I was like, please don't let Allison be like 3 people down on the list here. Thanks for joining.
Yes, thanks for inviting me. I found out about this last night, so really happy to be here today. Thanks for having me. My name is Alison. I'm just going to read it. My name is Alison Seeger, and I'm the director of the Vermont Language Justice Project. The project was created on my kitchen table as the pandemic started to close the state and the country down in March 2020. I'm a social worker by training, and I worked with many refugees who had come to Chittenden County. I also have friends, colleagues, and family members who have limited English access, and I was extremely concerned about how they were going to keep themselves safe and healthy during COVID, when the only information coming out was about how to do that in English. I knew that many newcomers to Vermont do not read and write in their own language, and so information translated and then put up on the internet would not be accessed or read. So I wrote a script about the basics of COVID, and my friend Mohammed Jafar created a video which he translated into Somali from my script. We posted it on YouTube and sent it out through WhatsApp and by word of mouth to everyone we knew throughout Vermont and indeed the country who spoke Somali, so they could have information about the deadly virus. A task force of over 40 community partners was established over the coming weeks. We met twice a week and figured out with extremely limited funds how to get information out in more languages, which would happen after the governor's addresses, where new and life-saving information was being shared in English. By the end of April, we were working in 10 languages. I was also doing my full-time job as well. Our translators at that point were translating very difficult medical information for $50 at a time. And I was working for free in the evenings every day and all weekend to make the videos and distribute them. When we were about to run out of money, we got 2 small grants from the from Winooski and Burlington. We were able to, the Department of Health stepped in and agreed to pay the translators for their time. I continue to work for free. Fast forward to November 2021, so that's what, some 18 months later, VDH received a health disparity grant from the CDC. The Vermont Language Justice Project was awarded $300,000. I was able to quit my job at Howard and began to work full-time for the project. We were taken in by CCTV, a cable access TV station in Burlington. COVID was still rampant, and so I kept my head down, making videos just to do with COVID. We produced 6 different videos about the rapid antigen tests that were being given out to folks. Again, these tests were being given out, but were only in English and Spanish. We produced these videos in 18 languages so folks could be safe and keep their families safe and know what to do. As COVID has receded, we began working on other health-related issues. And then over the past 18 months, have branched out into issues involving other aspects of public and emergency safety. Last winter, we produced videos in 18 languages on how to stay safe during the cold weather, and more recently, a video on how to drive safely in bad weather. Last spring, we did a video on how to stay safe in hot weather. When the flooding happened, we were able to respond within 24 hours to make videos on how to stay safe during flooding. These videos included information for farmers, residents who had flood damage, and videos on keeping yourself safe from scammers pretending to be FEMA workers. Over a period of 2 weeks, we produced 5 videos for a total of 57 videos, several in 18 unique languages. And these videos had over 7,000 hits during that 2-week period. These flood videos were made without any requests from the state, who were only responsive when we asked for money. Only one of the videos was paid for by the state of Vermont. 3 were made out of our CDC funding and 1 through a community action organization in Rutland. Most recently, we were asked by Hello Vermont to make a video about eclipse safety. Eventually, it was agreed that this video be paid for by the Vermont Tourist Board. These videos in 18 languages have received over 45,000 hits, over 2,700 of them in ASL and over 700 in English. And we find that our videos in English are actually really important for people too. Not everybody reads and writes, and our way of distributing videos allows our videos to get into the hands of people who don't read and write and can't have access to information online. 3 weeks ago, we were talking about doing a video about earthquake safety. We haven't at that point done that yet because we don't have the money to do it. 2 days later, there was an earthquake, and we just again think about what would happen if there was an earthquake today. There would be nothing for anybody in any languages other than English to know what to do, how to be safe. The task force that was established at the beginning of COVID still meets. Just yesterday we met, there were over 20 community partners present. This shows that the work continues to be relevant and important to community members. Here's the thing, like many nonprofits, we are about to fall off a funding cliff. It is projected our CDC funding will run out by August this year. We cannot survive fiscally with private contracts from nonprofits who have to fundraise to pay us. We just did a video about SNAP benefits, which was paid for by a fundraiser through the local Rotary Club. If we're going to be a state that welcomes people here to Vermont, we need to have an infrastructure that is able to adequately reach out to all peoples when there's an emergency that is life-threatening. Our videos did that during COVID, and they did that during the flooding. In this current time with climate change, we need to be ready for what happens next, and we need to be proactive, and there needs to be a budget whereby this can happen. That's it.
So Chase, go ahead.
You mentioned the number of hits for your videos. Do you have any info about how many were within the state and how many were?
It's really hard to know those numbers because Google and YouTube Analytics doesn't give those details. But for example, the flooding videos, you can only get those analytics if you subscribe to the channel. If somebody just comes across it and watches it, or it's sent and you're not a subscriber, we don't know where that person lives.
Okay.
But the videos on the flooding, the majority were in the state of Vermont that we did somehow get information for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Allison? Thanks so much for doing that work and
Yes,
sharing that with us this morning.
you're welcome. I hope you can find some way to fund what we do. And again, I just want to say, I want to just add something to the question that was asked of Ray about the racial equity board putting information out, translating documents, essential documents. It would be really interesting to look at the analytics on how many people actually view those documents in the languages that they're written in. My guess is very, very few. It's a mandate that happens. And so, of course, the state of Vermont needs to provide the money to do that. And I would just suggest from our experience over the last few years, people who really need that information are much more likely to look towards videos than trying to find that information online, where they have to navigate through an English kind of internet to actually get the information that they need in the language that maybe they could read. Okay, good.
Thank you. That is really interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. You have suggestions as to, I mean, since the Office of Racial Equity is a government office, do you have suggestions as to what they should be doing differently? I mean, I know you're doing it differently. You're not in state government. So do you have any suggestions to help with that mandate, that they make it more accessible for folks?
Well, I believe it's twofold. I mean, they have to be providing essential documents in translation form. I think along with those documents, it would be awesome if there were videos explaining what that document is about. It doesn't have to be word for word read from the document itself. But people would then at least have some of the information about what's going on.
And then how do people access those videos?
That's a great question. So how we distribute our information is we have over 110 community partners. So every time we produce a video, we send out the entire playlist to each community partner. When every video is made, we send that video back to the translator who did the audio. They then distribute it through their own community. So for example, our Mandarin translator has a list of over 100 people throughout the state of Vermont. If you think about wherever you go in Vermont, there's likely to be a Chinese takeout. She knows every single one of those. So she sends that Mandarin video out to her WeChat list, which reaches 100 people. Also, because we're part of Access, Community Access, we put several of the video languages up on Community Access. So, for example, Migrant Justice does a show on CCTV. I think it's every 2 or 3 weeks. So before and after their show, we put up videos in Spanish. We also have a list of like individual health practitioners and just individuals who want our videos. So we send it out to them as well. So we're growing and growing and growing. And I'm just going to say again, our money is about to end. And so if there is an earthquake, we're not going to be able to help you. It's as simple as that.
Thank you
It's as
so
profound
much.
as that. Yeah.
That's grassroots in action.
Yeah, it really is.
That's amazing. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
And I think it's really interesting that state government can't do that right now.
Well, they could.
I mean, or isn't doing it right now. So thank you.
Because when COVID happens, suddenly there was money. I mean, you know, I know they had money coming in, but they could. Yeah.
But they could improve on what's
Happens
there.
now. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Representative Moroki.
Sure. I hear your situation with finances. Have you made this request to the Appropriations Committee?
No, because I don't have the time to do that. I make videos, but
That's
you
where
need
the
to
money
figure
is.
that out. I mean, I do have Tiffany Blumley, I know, is on our side. I don't know how much she's done this year. I don't even know if she's on the Appropriations Committee. We probably need a lobbyist. I don't, we're running out of time to do that. So this is why we're coming here today. But thank you to explore that.
Representative Chasco.
One more question. In your experience with these communities, do they often, is it easier to find somebody who can read and write the language to not translate, to provide the information to people who can't read and write the language they speak? Or is it usually easier to find somebody to translate it from English to that language, which
So what we do
is
is,
a higher demand?
so translations are always great, but again, I'm just gonna say again, you know, people, not everybody reads and writes, and they're not gonna, like, this way, it goes straight into your file, and the way our distribution system is that we write a script, we send it to our trusted community interpreters, translators. They give us the audio file, we make a video, and then we send it back out to the community. And people will get it on their text, and they just click on the link, and then it will go straight to the video. So that to me is the most efficient way.
Thank you.
We're also making an app, so people will have immediate access to whatever video is that they want to see based on different categories, one of which will be obviously on emergencies. So, yeah. I could go on for hours. I'm probably done.
Thank you for being with us today, Allison. So our next witness is Honora Horton from Hunger Free Vermont.
It's all right with you, Chair, Mary, I would just like to come up together.
Please do, and we already have 2 chairs there, which great. Happy to have you testify, Joyce.
Chair.
Hi, welcome to GovOps. Please introduce yourselves for the record.
Thank you so much. I'm Honora Horton. I'm the Executive Director of Hunger Free Vermont. And I'm Carrie Steeler. I'm the Manager of Government and Public Affairs with the Vermont Food Bank.
Please give us your testimony on S310.
All right. Before I do that, I would just like to say that Hunger Free Vermont partnered with the Language Justice Project to create that SNAP video with funding from the Rotary. And I would just like to underscore how critical what the Vermont Language Justice Project is doing is, and that creating videos and communicating information in English as well as all the other languages spoken in Vermont is absolutely the future of how we are going to communicate information to people in this state. So I would just like to acknowledge the work of the Vermont Language Justice Project, and that it's critical for Hunger Free Vermont's work ensuring food access for people as well. All right, that was not in my script. So now, thank you so much for your time today and for your work on this really important bill. And we really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the importance of including food security in emergency response planning and execution. So Carrie and I are both members of the team that created the Vermont Food Security Roadmap to 2035. And we have copies of that for everyone in the committee today, in case you have yet to receive a copy. So
Digital copies?
there, yes.
Digital copy, if we
And-
can send a link.
Yes. It is linked in the testimony that you have. If anybody would like a physical copy as well, because it's a pretty substantial document.
I am like really anti-paper.
Okay.
I appreciate the link, but if anybody on the committee wants one, go for it.
That's cool.
I won't judge in this case.
You're going to be using this until 2035. Just saying. Well,
We can back it down.
yeah.
Oh,
We'll just pass those in.
If you have to look at it then. Yeah. All right.
We're good.
So we're members of the team that worked over the last 2 years to create the Vermont Food Security Roadmap to 2035. And we also both have the additional perspective of being members of the Mass Feeding Work Group, which is now known as the Food Access Information Network. And this group is comprised of staff from multiple state agencies and also statewide and regional nonprofits. And it was convened in 2020 under the auspices of the SEOC when it became clear that the pandemic was also a hunger crisis. And this group has been meeting ever since that time. Our experience is working within this group, the Mass Feeding Group, to address the lack of food security emergency response planning that we discovered during the pandemic, and again during the flooding in 2023, led to the inclusion of a set of strategies within this roadmap focused on creating a food security emergency response system in the state. And that's what we're here to talk to you about as you work on S310. We're excited for this opportunity to bring some recommendations to you that will advance this critical Vermont food security roadmap goal. And we come here out of the food bank and Hunger Free Vermont's direct experiences working to strengthen food security for everyone in Vermont over these past 4 years of cascading crises, we could say.
So as your committee is working to revise 310, you really have an incredible opportunity. Food security is not noted in any disaster management related statute. And so the opportunity in front of you is to take some suggestions in this language and insert them into this bill so that for future disasters, we are considering the food security of our neighbors, your constituents, when a disaster happens. During both COVID and the 2023 flooding, our organizations were really shocked to discover that no one was really in charge of food. No one was in charge of collecting and sharing information in any town emergency plan. There was not a state emergency planning template that related to food security for towns in disasters or emergencies. And there was no specifically identified role of the state or state government in particular about who it was that made those decisions or who held that information. During the chaotic moments directly after the onset of an emergency or a disaster, it's become clear that food support in communities at large has been left out of this broader planning process, and that we as a state have relied on community organizations, sometimes volunteer organizations made of, just a few individuals in a town or community to serve the need of anyone impacted who is without food during a crisis. There are a lot of examples, and we'd like to share a few specific ones with you just so you understand the variety of ways this has impacted both towns and individuals and the organizations trying to solve these problems on the fly during a disaster. I also want to mention that while the state recommended that everyone call 211 during disasters, the data collected by that system about food security and food needs, it was not always a question that was asked during those phone interviews, and it's an important question, but one that people often have to be prompted to share because food is often like a secondary challenge when your home is flooded and you no longer have anywhere to sleep. And the additional challenge to that was that 211 during July's floods, 211 had just been given insufficient funding by the state in the previous fiscal year and had gone down from 24/7 service. And so wasn't available during the hours of 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. for people who were calling people to leave a message. So there wasn't any data being collected in that time. So this piece is also really critical to the process of people accessing food during an emergency. I'm going to share a couple examples that the food bank experienced, and Nor has a few more that Hunger Free was more involved in. So we may go back and forth a bit. So this lack of planning played out in the July flood in a particular situation right at the very beginning when the city of Barrie was flooding and people were being told to go to the BOR to shelter. The morning of the floods, the food bank actually closed because our staff wasn't able to safely access our Berry Town Distribution Center up on Quarry Hill. And nevertheless, we received a call from the emergency folks at the BOR, and they said, do you have any water to bring down to the BOR? The water, there's no water here yet. Do you have bottled water at the food bank? We don't always keep bottled water on hand. It's not something that we always distribute through our network partners in communities around the state. But my colleague Joe, who drives one of our trucks, lives nearby and was like, I'll go get some water. So he drove a truck down to Hannaford's and then back up and over to the BOR because Joe is a great guy, not because the food bank has a role in this work or is the emergency response organization. But we are the people that you know, both emergency and town and municipal and state folks think of when they think of a need for food or water. And so some prior planning could have made a big difference, and we would have had food and water on hand. We could have helped move that to the BOR prior to the emergency and made sure that that was covered. And while our staff was quick thinking and resourceful, it's not a sustainable solution, particularly since we only have 3 distribution centers in Berry, Rutland, and Brattleboro, and those are not always close to the areas that are flooded.
Just to offer another example. So again, from the July flooding, it became very quickly apparent that there actually was, as Carrie said, no system in place to accurately track where were people flooded out of their homes, whose kitchens were inoperable, where were prepared meals needed in the areas that experienced the greatest flooding. So that the Red Cross and the Salvation Army and World Central Kitchen, which, you know, showed up in Vermont, and that was great, but they couldn't effectively plan and distribute the prepared meals because there was no map of where the need was. So the SCOC contacted Hunger Free Vermont, and we were asked to figure out a way to get this data and then to get the data to these national emergency response organizations. And we did our best. We mobilized our network of hunger councils all around the state and then pieced together the anecdotal information that they relayed to us, and then worked with these disaster relief organizations and also with partners like Feeding Chittenden and small businesses that we tracked down, like food trucks. We got food trucks to just go with prepared meals to isolated and hard hit towns like Marshfield, for example, and to try to reach people with prepared meals who needed them.
At the same time, while that prepared meal need was happening, there were still people who were reliant on our network partnered food shelves and food pantries for their regular food needs, but who were also impacted by flooding, but maybe still had kitchen facilities or were maybe isolated because of water damage, or who received home deliveries from those network partner organizations because they were already homebound. And an example of that happened here in Montpelier, where Montpelier's food pantry was actually underwater during the flood. They lost everything. They were located in one of the church basements over on Main Street. But immediately after the floods, knew that the people who relied on them still needed charitable food. So they worked with us at the food bank and a ton of local volunteers who showed up and operated a pop-up food shelf that changed locations all the time. They were serving food out of coolers with ice they were picking up from Shaw's. It was really incredible what they were able to do, but it was not a solution that was always very manageable. It wasn't something that they had the funds and support they needed. We tried to, we were able to give them some grant funding. We were able to help get the food that they needed, but it was an amazing scramble by that organization. And the folks that were on their home delivery list were often the last people who had to wait because those volunteers that weren't available to do home delivery. They were busy doing the pop-up site. It was really disruptive to their normal services. And that happened in several towns where the food pantry was impacted. Londonderry also had some challenges, Marshfield as well. So, considering charitable food access organizations as part of the emergency plan, because they are a critical way that people who are already vulnerable are receiving food is an important piece of this future of disaster planning work.
And just sticking with Montpelier after the flooding for a minute, as you all, I'm sure know, that in that initial 3-week period after the flooding, all the churches in Montpelier sustained so much damage that they had to stop operating their food pantry in that same way, but also all of the free congregate meal site operations in the entire city ceased operation. And into that void stepped one of our local businesses, the Skinny Pancake. They started serving free meals because they're, elevated, and they actually weren't damaged by the flood to all who needed them in Montpelier. But they reached out and let us know that without a source of funding, they wouldn't be able to keep going. And there was no system in state government in emergency planning to get funds quickly to restaurants, food trucks that in many different towns in Vermont started handing out meals to people, and yet were risking their own economic survival to do that. So we scrambled and started reaching out to donors and secured private funds to cover their costs so they could keep providing this critical food lifeline for people in Montpelier when all of the congregate meal sites were inoperable. So many restaurants and food trucks all over Vermont jumped in to do things like this, yet there wasn't any provision in place at the state to fund these efforts. It took quite a long time to get anything stood up for that with FEMA funding. It was left to SEVCA, Hunger Free Vermont, and private philanthropy to cobble stipends together to keep these valuable small businesses open and to help cover some of their losses. So, speaking for Hunger Free Vermont, I'm very proud of our staff's efforts to make all of that happen. But Hunger Free Vermont is not an emergency response organization. We don't actually have those skills. We don't have the systems in place to do what we were asked to do by the state during the July floods. And yet someone needs to be equipped to create a system for accurately mapping and responding to where food and meals are needed before the next disaster hits us. Food security during the next disaster cannot be left to community and nonprofit organizations alone to address. This planning needs to happen at the highest levels of government, just like all of our disaster management planning, and to be on the top of our minds well before the next disaster or emergency occurs. So that's our opening and some examples of what we could do better on in the future. And we have some now specific recommendations. One that we're not recommending get put into S310, but I feel that you all on this committee are some of the few people in this building who actually are going to know what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to flag it, and then Carrie's going to walk through the very specific recommendations we have for this bill. But one long-term strategy that does directly relate to the future of our disaster planning, and that will allow Vermont to leverage more federal funding to support food security for low-income families during disasters, is to continue to really support meeting the established goal of completing the rollout of a fully integrated enrollment and eligibility IE&E system that AHS is working on and other state agencies by 2027. So investing in information technology changes that are required to allow all federal nutrition program options and flexibilities to be activated in case of an emergency would help sustain food security during times of emergency and all the time, because every day, if you're hungry, is actually a day of emergency. For example, many families enrolled in Three Squares Vermont lost food in the 9 flood, individual disaster declaration counties declared by FEMA. And they all would have been eligible for disaster SNAP benefits, which provide extra benefits to replace food for people on Three Squares Vermont who lose food during a disaster. But the current IT system at AHS is incapable of separating Three Squares Vermont households by county. And since FEMA only declared certain counties eligible for that kind of individual assistance, we could not apply for disaster SNAP and we could not leverage that federal funding to replace people's lost food. So, you know, that is where this long-term planning around technology improvements and the IE&E system intersect with the work on a bill like S310. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Carrie to talk about some specific sections of S310 and some.
Before we move from the INE.
Yeah.
Representative Chase, if that's something we should follow up on, with always administration. Happy to get some testimony scheduled about whether that, those considerations.
It was starting to make progress again, but.
I guess my bigger question for them though would be, are they learning those lessons about, I mean, because it's just an input, right? We just need to know what county people live in and be able to have the system sort by county for next time. Are they taking that information and using it in the development of the eligibility software or not?
I don't have that information about it.
I know you don't, but what I'm saying, I'm wondering maybe if I can delegate to you to ask that question and see if they want to come talk to us about it before because I know we're gonna hear 20 other things and I'm gonna totally forget about it.
It's in our written testimony.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're following up on it before then.
I will say that Department for Children and Families staff are very, very well aware of this and have discussed it with us. And I do believe that they are paying attention to that.
Excellent.
Yes. Thank you.
And fix for next
Thank you
time.
for sharing that I played that. I'm so excited.
You know, if we're building software and there are funds available, we just need to connect Vermonters in the right way. Like maybe we actually can do these things.
Yes. Okay, so moving on to the fun part, I have some specific language suggestions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So in S310, we're looking at the bill as passed by the Senate. I think we updated the pages, so we're a little closer than Charlie Baker was earlier. Glad we went after him. So in section 7 on page, I believe it's 15 and 16 in the bill version that you are looking at, subsection C, number 3, where it says the divisions shall advise municipalities. We suggest adding a sentence to that, and we provided some specific language in our written testimony, but we're asking that municipalities consult with the food bank or local community-based emergency or charitable food providers in the siting of shelters, knowing that we are the secondary responders and that we want to make sure that they have immediate and sustained access to food and water in that area. Staying in section 7.
I just want to make sure. So you got specific language
Very
recommendations.
specific language recommendations.
We're going to be moving real fast the next couple of days, but
Yes.
want to catch.
Copy and paste. They're all in red in the PDF that we provided, so you can see them clearly. And so I'm not going to read them all verbatim. I'm just going to kind of give you the gist of them. Section 7, page 16, line 6, subsection 3, begins with a regional emergency management committee. We would love for, in the non-voting member section, to have a community-based emergency or charitable food provider added to that list of non-voting members so that someone on that committee is thinking specifically about the food access of folks in a region. In subsection 9, which I believe is your page 18, subsection B, on local emergency planning committees, we would like to also add a food security seat to that as well. So someone is thinking about that. And we again use the language of community-based emergency or charitable food providers. And I just want to share a little bit more about why we're using that broad language. The food bank has network partners around the state. There's about 225 of them. There is not a specific network partner in every municipality. And so sometimes people will have to draw, communities might want to draw on other people, whether it's a school-based provider or, folks who have other food access experience. So keeping that language open so that we have options.
There's a running theme throughout a lot of the work that we've been doing, which is that because we only have really town and state government and we don't really have regional entities, that we're constantly thinking about in many of the public safety and emergency, all the work that we're doing about like, where's the gap? And this is just another example for the committee to flag of like, how do we coordinate between towns that maybe share a service provider in this particular area?
Yeah, and a lot of our service providers serve multiple towns is the other piece, because it's a very organic system. It's not necessarily as structured as state and municipal government. So there is often flexibility in people who understand towns but may not actually live in them. In section 11, which I believe is your page 21, subsection A, which is Vermont Emergency Management Division Disaster Preparedness Review. We'd like to add a line that adds the ability to provide food and water where it is needed, calling out specifically that food access piece. And we added it sort of right after emergency shelters, but that's also in our written testimony. In section 32, which is the State Emergency Response Commission creation, we would like to ask for 2 additional members. One, we would like the chair of the Food Access and Information Network, who is a state employee, to be represented within that list of state entities. We feel that whoever is the state chair at any point will bring the perspective of that group and the state specific food programs and the disaster versions of those food programs, which are unique and require that unique knowledge. And then in the public members, we would like to ask that the Vermont Food Bank be added as a public member and have a designee on that committee from our staff, because there's a lot of experience within our own organization. I will also name, are not a disaster response organization, but because we work broadly across the state in charitable food access, we often understand a different kind of landscape than other organizations who are listed here. I'm just going to name, that would also change how you have to appoint people and who gets how many appointees, and shook things up a little bit. And then, that's restaurant, that's the section 33. Okay, great.
Okay, so those are the places where we offered specific language changes to specific places in the bill. And I've got 2 more pieces. We have 2 more ideas to propose to you to add to this bill. So the first concerns the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program. And in our written testimony, we provided language there that is brought from H703 and S215 bills that were introduced this session. Rather than walk you through the language, I'm going to talk about why we're suggesting that this might be part of disaster and emergency response. So the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program is run through the USDA Food and Nutrition Service. It is an option that any state can choose to add to their SNAP program. Vermont has chosen not to include it in our SNAP program thus far. The Restaurant Meals Program allows certain SNAP recipients to use their benefits at approved participating restaurants. These are SNAP recipients who are elderly, so either 60 years of age or older, disabled, or homeless, or the spouse of a SNAP recipient who is either elderly, disabled, or homeless. And then restaurants qualify by applying directly to USDA. And also they have to be approved by the state of Vermont, and the state can set specific criteria for that restaurants have to meet in the state in order to participate. And then in addition, it's important that a position be included at AHS in partnership with CCD to actually help restaurants through the application process. This is a federal program. The application process for the restaurant is not easy. So as I said, this language comes from H703 and S215. S215 was passed out of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee this session. Further action on the bill was deferred in Senate appropriations. And we understand that an appropriation for the proposed restaurant meal program navigator position is not likely this session. We want to emphasize that based on informational interviews we did with all the other states that have implemented SNAP restaurant meals, this position is really essential if we were to implement this program. Establishing the SNAP restaurant meals program in Vermont would support the ability to quickly make and distribute prepared meals at the local level during disasters. It would establish a network of restaurants, food trucks, deli counters, and general stores, et cetera, that were all already working with AHS and ACCD, which could quickly be mobilized to also use federal and state disaster funds to set up prepared meal distribution program. This program flexibility is critical in times of a disaster because, as we saw during both the COVID-19 pandemic and the flooding in 2023, prepared meals are a critical resource for feeding people, and our local restaurants are often one of the businesses most impacted by changes in economic conditions brought about by disasters. By establishing the SNAP Restaurant Meals program in Vermont now, we will ensure that our restaurants are ready and able to accept SNAP during future disruptions and provide much needed prepared meals to households that qualify and need them, and using federal funds to do that. The SNAP Restaurant Meals program supports critical future infrastructure. For example, in Barre during the 2023 floods, businesses were not as strongly affected as places as people's homes were, but many low-income city residents suddenly became homeless. Had the restaurant meals program been available, federal SNAP benefits could have been used more flexibly to allow people over age 60, people with disabilities, and people who were homeless, including people made homeless by the floods, to access prepared food that did not require home kitchen facilities. Participating local restaurants would have been able to receive the federal funds that would pay for these meals through the SNAP program immediately at their point of sale. So that's one bigger picture piece.
Before we move on, Representative Higley had a question.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to know, in the current wording, it says they may, state of Vermont may participate. And you're wanting to change it to shall. You said that they haven't done that up to now. What's the reason?
Well, I mean, I don't represent the AHS. So I think one of the critical pieces is that capacity is important. The program, as I said, is challenging for restaurants to enter. Once they're in it, it's not challenging to operate, but to get in, it's challenging. And that is why I'm saying that a position to be a navigator for restaurants is critical.
And then, yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, if there's a need for food to feed people, why are we looking at locally produced foods that are widely available in restaurant programs for clients, restaurants serving foods that represent diverse cultural tradition, participate in the restaurant meal program? I mean, if we're looking for food to feed people, why are we making such specific qualifications for people that apply or that apply for that program?
Well, those are just naming. So that's not saying that any restaurant couldn't participate in the program. It's just naming that these are additional considerations that we should pay attention to, making sure that there's broad geographic distribution of restaurants, not just that we have a lot of restaurants in Burlington and Barre get in the program, and we don't like make sure that the one general store in, a small rural town is not being helped through the process to apply. And I think those are named as additional considerations that would be written into the design of a Vermont SNAP restaurant meals program. But it's not saying that it's not excluding any restaurant from participation.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that's important. I think the point you're making is is critical.
Geographically, I certainly understand.
Yeah.
The rest of this is just over the top for me, but thank you.
Thank you.
So I think just to kind of level set expectations for the committee, I don't believe that this particular ask is being contemplated in the appropriations process right now, unless I'm gonna be totally shocked. And I think the idea here is that there's a real wish that we look at this as a delivery mechanism set up to be ready for this. And I don't know that other folks in the building are kind of ready for this particular policy discussion right now. And I certainly think that adding this to the bill would require a lot of testimony from a couple of other committees that I don't think this S310 is going to be able to accommodate, just given the fact that we're heading toward the end of the session. But so I didn't want the committee to go too far down the rabbit hole on this. I think it's an important to have, but it's not one that we're probably going to be able to get into S310 in our work over the next few days. Representative Hengo.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, but I was gonna wait until later if this is really human services realm and not ours.
And you know, we're really starting in this bill to get to a place where it's like, what's public safety
Yeah.
and emergency response versus what is the things that we usually think of as human services. And I think what we're hearing loud and clear from Hunger Free Vermont and the Vermont Food Bank is we kind of left out food as part of our emergency planning in the past. We have to actually have people who do a great job making sure Vermonters don't go hungry at the table when we're thinking about being ready for the next emergency. And then what are the other things that we need to be planning for? And so there is this intersectionality there that's really important.
So after they're finished with their testimony, I have a suggestion.
Okay. Representative Byron, okay.
So we can do what we can with this bill, but I just want to say more broadly, given my history in the restaurant industry, given my history with the early origin of Everyone Eats, getting that set up before it was even called Everyone Eats. I've worked with World Central Kitchen during this flood recovery period. I am all yours to try and figure this out. It's a long-term thing. I do absolutely see this having a legitimate place in emergency response. I think there's two conversations. There's what we do day over day for Vermonters, and then there's what do we do when an all hazard or a big event happens. So I think those are two separate conversations in the same vein. And so to the emergency component, I'm all yours to try and figure this out. But we're on a very tight clock, so I don't know really what we can do at a high level here. But long-range planning, I would love to sit down.
Duly noted. Thank you. Can I just interrupt a second? I want to go back to what Representative Hingo mentioned about whether this is human services or public safety or food. I just want to share with the committee and just a little more broadly, it's also part of the roadmap information. Food really is not a topic that has a very specific home in the State House at large. Food resiliency was recently added to the Agricultural Committee's jurisdiction. They're still really working through what food resiliency means. For us, food resiliency does not always mean emergency food response. It does not always mean food access for people who are hungry or for people who do not have access to grocery stores like the rest of us do, or who are financially insecure and can't make those ends meet, right? So I think that there is some work to do together to really figure out where the appropriate places for food are. We, because of the work we've been asked to do in the past two emergencies, can really see how food needs to be a consideration in disaster planning and understand that it is not totally the jurisdiction of this committee, but that you do really have a piece, and a really important piece, and a really plan ahead piece of food security in this particular emergency window that you're thinking of with S310. And then there is a lot more work to do in the State House and with state government at large to consider how we as a state do work for people who, you know, need to be food secure. And that includes everyone in the state of Vermont. And I say that because, you know, it's one of those variable things where sometimes people are food secure one week and they're not another week. So it could include all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And our final piece of testimony today does involve the sort of public safety emergency distribution of food piece, and that is providing some base funding for the Vermont Food Bank to actually be able to respond the way that state government ongoingly asks the Vermont Food Bank to respond during these disasters. Like, can you bring bottled water to the shelter in Barre immediately? We don't have any. In order for the Vermont Food Bank to play that role, if that is a role that the state of Vermont wants this nonprofit organization, the Vermont Food Bank, to play, then the Vermont Food Bank has got to be resourced to be able to make an emergency plan and have those emergency supplies ready. So I think, you know, what Carrie said, I'll just echo. We are here in this committee. We're so happy to have been invited in. And in many other committees also, having this conversation because the way we deal with food security in our state is decentralized among multiple state agencies, multiple legislative committees, and it didn't work to have it set up that way over the past 4 years, and it's not going to work in the future. So it's really, really important that the state provide funding for the food bank to ensure that specific quantities of food and water are available and ready for distribution during emergencies, and including to get that food and water out to the 300 community partners in all these different municipalities that we're expecting to handle emergency response, you know, food shelves and meal sites and direct service providers across the state, so that whenever an emergency happens, food and other basic necessities can be provided to people in a timely manner.
Other questions on food in our emergency and disaster planning? Thank you for the really thoughtful suggestions. I think that will so I'll give the committee a short break, and when we come back, I'd like to discuss a little bit what we've heard this morning, and then go through the changes in the new draft that Tim prepared for us. We've kind of been looking at in the context of the testimony we've heard this morning, when we get back, and then this afternoon we'll hopefully have some time to come back and work on this a little further and dive in and have some committee discussion about next steps and who else we need to hear from. Tomorrow, we're going to be hearing about 211 and those sections and a little bit more, I think, on the stormwater utilities pieces. So we're going to try to get testimony on all the sections, see who else we need to hear from. My hope would be that we're pretty close to having the bill ready on Friday, making last week's over the weekend and trying to get this thing out on Tuesday because it's got more stops to make. So I just wanted to set all those expectations with everybody. But yeah, go ahead, Representative Berlicki. Anything for our citizens?
And thank you for your work and your suggestions and the commendable work stepping up. What I'm hearing though makes me wonder, what's the role of the Vermont Guard in providing some of these services? Sorry, Lisa.
Just took it.
Great minds work together. So that's something I'd like to put on the table. And it sounds like Lisa would too.
Absolutely, because that's what they're there for.
That's what they're there for.
And we are the military committee.
Yeah.
I mean, and they were very active before any of these apparatuses were.
Always have
the
been.
ones at the airports handing out,
Yep.
you know,
MREs.
various aspects of food from
Water.
MREs in the earliest days to other, you know, grocery items.
I don't know if we want to talk more
I
adults.
mean,
I think
the
that.
guard ran.
And that should be an integral part of it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's where we have to figure out, like, you know, what does it look like when something hits? Like it should be a sort of phased reactions, right? Like maybe the guard's like the first point of contact. If it really goes sideways fast, but then when you can tier out these other mechanisms.
I think our witness has a response to Representative Hender's thoughtful suggestion here.
I mostly just have information about how that worked during COVID. So the Vermont Food Bank worked with the Guard as the food provider. A lot of the food that came into the state during the pandemic was from the Federal Emergency Food Access Program. And we are the state, the named state administrating agency for that program. And so worked with the Guard as the physical boots on the ground, you know, individuals who are handing that food out, but that food was, you know, coming through our facilities. So it really is a partnership, and we have relied on the Guard to do that work together. And it is not always clear when to call the Guard and when to call us and when to call us both.
So that's where I was going to go with this after they were finished, that I think we need to be very clear when the governor does call the Guard for a state of an emergency, that they provide the food bank provides the food, however it's set up with the federal government or whoever is providing food, even if it includes other programs, like for instance, the restaurant meal programs or whatever. You also mentioned water. That should be something that the food bank or another entity has on hand that the Guard can pick up and distribute. So I think the lack of clarity about when to call the Guard needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think the first asks about being included in the planning, about having food be included explicitly in the planning, and including also things like bottled water. I assume we have our food organizations, and we're also talking about things like that. So that'll direct Vermont Emergency Management to include the Vermont Food Bank and the partners in that conversation, so that we don't run into that again. I think that's exactly what Honora and Carrie are trying to get at here in some of these language suggestions. So
it's just interesting that it was not mentioned anywhere here. So we need to address that for sure.
I concur. Just that the Guard wasn't mentioned?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because they're like I mean, you know, they had to ask their own person to risk his life going through a flood to pick up water to deliver it when the Guard stands ready to do that type of work. So we definitely need to.
Joe lived locally and didn't have to go through the flood.
Well, yeah, they could have in other areas, like London area was completely cut off.
Yeah, so I think because there's already that the Guard already through the governor's office has a seat at the table in the decision making, that the ask here and the reason why it wasn't directly related to the Guard is that the folks who provide the food that the Guard ends up distributing haven't been included. They haven't been at the table. So I don't think anyone, especially not me as the chairman, any disrespect to the Guard in this conversation. And if it would help the committee understand the relationships, happy to have folks from the Guard come in and talk to us about how this worked from their perspective. We should probably try to do that tomorrow, or probably tomorrow afternoon.
Probably already gonna do that. Deputy Adjutant General could come in and he'd be a good person to talk to.
The other thing too is I would like to understand where they sit at the table for Vermont Emergency Management. Are they actually represented at that table, or is it the administration that's represented at that table? So I need to see like a flow chart of that. Thank you, Representative Markey. I really appreciate you bringing that up.
All right,
So we are running way behind now. We have two more witnesses. I want to take a break and then get to them. So unless there's anything really critical right now for us to consider, we are going to come back to this.
No, thank you all so much.
Thank you. So I want to take 10 minutes.